Hey guys, this is New Sensei. Today we have another monthly archery question and answer. Now this month I've only chosen a handful of questions. The main reason being that one, I didn't get as many as last time, but secondly, there are a few really good questions which I want to cover in specific videos later on. The first question comes from Jace, and he wants to know about the pros and cons about using a 3-finger draw compared to a thumb draw. In very, very broad terms, the thumb is the strongest digit on the hand. It gives you the most power in your draw, whereas the 3-finger method, or the Mediterranean draw, has less power but more control. In terms of using a thumb draw, this mostly depends on which style of archery that you practice. The thumb draw was far more predominant in Eastern style archery, looking at Eastern European horseback archery, Mongolian archery, Korean archery, Japanese kyudo. Most of these styles use the thumb draw, and there are a few historical reasons. And one of the tactical advantages is that because you load from the other side of the bow using a thumb draw, it tends to be easier to load and shoot from horseback. Now these aren't the definitive advantages of a thumb draw, but traditionally it has been used as a preferred method for various reasons. I'm sure proponents of the thumb draw will add in more specific details and corrections, and that's fine, but basically speaking, it's a trade-off between power and control. Andrew asks, when should you start increasing your target range? And by this I assume he means distance. I think that while shooting at very long distances has its unique romantic feel when it comes to seeing the arrow float and arc onto the target, I think you should start close and only start moving back to longer distances once you feel confident enough that you will not miss the target. In terms of specifying exactly when, a lot of archery clubs will have a distance qualification program where you have to achieve certain scores at certain distances before you move back. And one reason is it's a safety issue, so you don't break arrows or overshoot the target. The second reason is it gives you a more positive foundation. I think people who move back too soon and miss a lot of arrows lose a lot of motivation to shoot because they feel like they're terrible, they feel like they can't be an archer because they can't hit the target. But in fairness, they're going too far too soon. So think of a way in which you can quantify your shooting. And once you reach certain benchmarks and milestones, that's when you move back. And honestly, for a lot of people, when they're struggling at long distance, they go back anyway. Like I said, going too far too soon will make you focus on the wrong things in your process, and you end up being target fixated or having tunnel vision on your target rather than paying attention to the rest of your form. Which leads on to Andrew's second question, does distance matter for form training? And the answer to that is absolutely not. There is no real need to shoot long distance if you're only working on form. If you're shooting in your backyard and just training for form and muscle memory, then look as close as you can. 3 meters, 5 meters, 10 meters if you really want to. But the closer you are to the target, the less you worry about not hitting it. When it comes to form, you shoot the same way at 10 meters, the same way you shoot at 50 meters or 70 meters. Now, again, like I said before, people who struggle at long distances, their form starts to fall apart, they move to close range blind bow shooting at 5 meters where you can't miss a target, and you just try and get that feeling back. So form practice, close distance. You don't try to practice form on a long distance target. Now again, we talk about people who are elite professional archers. Mostly the training is at 70 meters because that's when they shoot in competition, and they do their form training at 70, but they have specific one-on-one professional coaching. That's a little different from casual backyard regular practice. So yeah, like I said, close as possible. Distance isn't really a factor. when you try to train form at long distance, you do silly things like being target fixated, trying too hard to aim, getting target panic, and so on. So eliminate variables, shoot close distance for form training. Question from Rust, who is starting with club bare bows and going on to an Olympic style bow later on. Should I learn string walking? It doesn't hurt to do so. It depends on how you do your bare bow shooting. You have the instinctive style, and a lot of people are instinctive purists, where all you do is shoot instinctive. That's fine. But using a point of aim method like string walking is fine. In fact, if you want to achieve any form of consistency that you can rely on, not like instinctive experience, but actually trying to aim with a bare bow, then yes, string walking is a method that you can depend on. It gives you a reference point, and that inherently gives you a certain edge. There are other methods like face walking or gap shooting, but yeah, string walking is fine. It's just a technique, and you can always learn other techniques later on. It won't hinder your ability to use sights on Olympic recurve. You just use different techniques and different styles. Social Engineering asked, is it better to buy good limbs on a cheap riser if you're stuck on a budget? While limbs make a pretty big difference, especially cheap limbs versus the very top end limbs, there's a big difference in smoothness and the draw force curve and stacking. I still think that it's better to go for a good riser and cheap limbs. It's much easier to swap out the limbs compared to the riser. The riser is your hub. It's where you place all your components. It has the most effect on vibration. A good riser will put more out of low-end limbs, whereas a cheap riser will be a bottleneck, in my opinion. Additionally, the good risers will determine the balance and feel of your bow, whereas limbs don't do that. So limbs might make a big difference in performance, but I think the riser is still ultimately the heart of the bow, and I would still prioritize getting a good riser and cheap limbs rather than the other way around. Richard asked, is it normal for your clicker to move? Generally speaking, yes, it's normal. It's certainly not unusual for clickers to move from vibration and from usage, and it's something which you have to check before each shot. It depends on what kind of clicker you have. If you have the single point mounted clickers with the screw, then they can move back and forth, and you do have to check each time. Can you prevent that? Well, you could use washers and all that, but it's not really a huge annoyance, but something which as part of your pre-shot check, you just got to make sure the clicker is in the same spot. Now, if it moves too frequently, yeah, I think you need to change the screw or add a washer, but most clickers, when properly attached, don't move that frequently, but you just have to watch out for it. Meander asked a very good question. Do you reserve separate arrows for competition and practice? I personally don't. I don't have one set of arrows, or two actually. My ACEs, which are used for my regular target shooting, and my current batch of gold tip traditionals, which I use with the bare bow demonstrations. It's not unusual for a serious competitive archer, and I talk about someone who spends a lot of time competing in different events, to have different sets of arrows for different events. People will have indoor arrows, outdoor arrows, arrows for real windy conditions, field arrows, cloud arrows, and some people use the same set for every single event. But the people who are really serious and know the equipment really well will personalize and customize different sets for different events. Billy asked for a recommendation for a bare bow on a budget. This is a very common question, just because a lot of people want confirmation on the first purchase, and really any bare bow Olympic riser that's reasonable price is good enough. The bows like the SF Premium or the SF Forge Plus especially are great entry-level possibilities for a beginner. If you want a specific bare bow, like just for bare bow shooting with potential sights and stabilizers later on, there are a lot of alternatives. I mean, things like the Cartel Phantom good options for in some shops. The main thing to look out for is that for a typical entry-level recurve, for bare bow at least, a lot of the entry-level bows are quite heavy. This makes it a bit easier for a beginner to hold steady. It's more forgiving in terms of vibration and variations in your grip. So it's a bit easy to use these heavier beginner level bows, whereas the high end bows tend to be a bit more lightweight and balanced differently, and you need more control and more discipline to make the most out of them. Doesn't mean you can't use them, but they can be a bit more punishing for slight mistakes. And the question of the month is again from David. Unfortunately, this question isn't a very good question, but I find it a very funny question. And the question is, what question do you get asked most often? The most common question I get asked is, what bow do you use? For starters, I use a Win Inno 60. That's my main competition bow. But the reason why I get asked this question, it's actually pretty interesting. I didn't really think about this. The main reason why I get asked this question, I think, is because I don't actually say so in most of my videos. And this is just like, when you make hundreds of archery videos, you tend not to include your bow in every single video. But I know a lot of people have a fascination with details and specifications. It's like, when you play a game, you want to know what specs the person's PC has. Or when someone's driving a car, what mods they have. And I think archery has a similar fascination. There are a lot of technical details which you want to find out about and look up and compare. So I think the norm for a lot of other hobbies is to include an equipment list, and most of my videos don't have that. I just use whatever I have lying around and my stuff, so I don't really mention it every single time. It's a little tedious to include that in every video and every description. I have been doing it a bit more often as of late. But that's probably the reason why people ask, is they see the bow, they don't know what it is, so they want to find out. And normally the description is where they find it, but a lot of people who shoot normally don't mention it. I know archers who have one-off form checks or demonstration videos might list it very proudly. Again, because it's become the norm for me to use my equipment, I tend not to mention it every single time. Anyway, that's it for this month's Q&A. As usual, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them below or send me a message via YouTube or Facebook or email me. This is New Sensei. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.